Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual plant clinic. We're glad that you can join us. I'm just going to go over a few announcements while we wait for everybody to get logged in, and then I'll let David get started so we can talk about houseplants today. First of all, if you have attended our classes in the past, welcome back. As always, we're so glad to have you. If you are new, you will ask questions during this class by using our Q&A box. So this is a webinar format. So you will click on that Q&A button on your Zoom menu, type your question into the Q&A box, and I'll be taking those and submitting them to David during the Q&A segments. If you have any other issues, please feel free to let me know. I have a chat box open. You all are welcome to submit chats to me as well. You can send your questions there. It may be a little bit harder for me to sort them, so I recommend sending those to the Q&A if you can. But if you have any tech issues, or if you send questions to the chat, that's fine. And I'll be keeping an eye on all of that. We are recording today, so if you have to leave early for any reason, or if you want to share with your friends or family, you can access the recording usually tomorrow, about 24 hours after the class on our YouTube channel. So if you have any questions about how to access that, feel free to send me a message. I can help you to access our YouTube channel. I think that is about it. David is going to be discussing houseplants today. So David, I will hand it on over to you to get started.
Well, thanks, Sally, and welcome aboard, everybody. Nice to have you here today. Wow, we got above freezing this week, right? For a brief moment, had a little bit of warmth and sunshine, a little bit of melting going on. What a nice change that was. So I want to kick things off today just by sharing a little story with you. And so basically what happens, once upon a time, several years back, I had a customer approach the plant clinic, come to me, visit me, plant clinic with a dead plant. Now that's a normal thing. And the deal was this plant was dead. I mean, it was dried up, turned brown, shriveled in the pot, dead, not coming back kind of deal. So it's a pretty straightforward deal. And I just asked what happened here, so what's the story on this plant? And the customer explained to me, well, they just purchased this maybe a month ago or so. It just recently bought the plant. And it was beautiful. I don't even remember what kind of plant it is. It's not even relevant to the story so much. It's just the thing that it was, as I remember. It's like beautiful at the time she purchased it. A month goes by and then it's like dead, 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 dead. And so I just asked my routine questions. And I kind of start by saying, oh, well, I'm sorry this happened. What was the watering routine? Were you following on that? So none. So, okay, that's interesting. So, during this time period, you never watered the plant? So, oh, no, never watered the plant. I was like, alrighty, and kind of what's the exposure? The lighting situation. She says, oh, it sits in my house. It sits back in the corner of my house. I'm like, that's good. Fertilizer? No, none. And so at the point of this, I start to say, well, you have to take care of plants. You need basically, plants are pretty easy to grow in a lot of ways, but just like we reviewed in our botany class a couple of weeks ago, we talked about, well, pretty much all plants, they're going to need sun. They're absolutely going to need water, to some degree, and a few nutrients. If we provide these basic needs, then we can grow plants. And this is pretty much true whether I'm growing my plants outside, whether it's tree, shrub, vegetable, flower, foliage plant inside the house. But her point was, and she was new to gardening. I understand that's a learning process. She's like, well, no, when I came to purchase this plant, she said, I purchased it because it's a house plant, that it's for growing in the house. That's the whole point of the plant. I said, well, yes, I hear you on that. I said, but all plants are going to need a certain amount of sun, water, and nutrients. This is just something that we have to provide for them to be successful. Uh, I was trying to coach her through on some of this, and she was just adamant. She's like, no, no, I told the salesperson that I was purchasing a house plant. She looked at that. So that means this plant was for growing in the house. And because there's no rain, there's no sun or nutrients in the house, the plant is supposed to live in the house. So at this point, things are starting to, like, I'm pretty even tempered, but I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm caught in this kind of absurd, ridiculous argument, or is about to go that direction. And this is not really going to be constructive for either of us. And, that's like we talked about, hey, plants evolved out of the water. They need water, to different degrees and stuff like that. You have to buy. But she was really just adamant. Her point said, no, there's no misunderstanding. This was for growing in my house. I told them I needed a house plant, and this is a house plant. And it didn't work. It died. So that's like stuck in my brain ever since. And this happened many, many years ago. But since that time, I thought, well, she's kind of got a valid point. If you're growing a plant in the house and we sell this as a house plant, should it be adapted to living in that house? So I've never resolved this in my mind. It's been out there. But since that time, I have avoided using the word houseplant. Now, Sally chose the title for today's class, which she called it Houseplant Highlights. I was about to have this thing corrected, and I was about to call Sally and tell her about this whole situation and exactly why I don't use that term. But I thought, no, this was a learning experience for me. It can be a learning experience for all of us, a little bit how we kind of discuss plants. So I still don't know what to do to call it. So sometimes you'll hear me talk about indoor plants. You might hear me talk about tropical plants. I might get real wordy and start saying growing plants indoors to be accurate, specific. But the bottom line is today's topic, we're talking about having plants, growing plants in our home. But I want to start from the beginning and say, plants, as we know, and this is my review from our botany class, we need to have sun, water, and some nutrients. We have control over the watering, right? I mean, we don't have a big issue with watering because if we're growing plants in our home, that's a responsibility that we take on, and we basically can go and we can fill up a watering can and we can provide water and moisture for plants. We can provide the minerals and nutrients that needs either in the soil media or through fertilizing. The most critical part, and I think one of the things that I talk about a lot with people, the limiting factor to growing plants in our home is having adequate light for them. Because as we know, we talked about them being basically the sun eater, where plants take that light through the magic of photosynthesis, use that in the production of their food. So if we deprive them of adequate sunlight, then that's going to affect their performance and everything, how we go through. So that's what I'm going to spend today talking about. I'm going to go through basically the same process that you would go through planting or selecting a plant for your garden outside, the different types of plants we have, the lighting conditions, how we're going to water them, care for them. We'll have time. I'll take a little break for questions. We'll talk about nutrition because it's the virtual plant clinic. I'll be talking about pests. We'll be talking about all of that stuff today. So please join in the conversation. I want to hear from you, questions, ideas, things that shared that work for you, and we all learn from each other. Now, a part of this, and it's not coincidence, but this happens to fall right as we're going into Valentine's Day. So within the indoor plant world, I am certainly featuring plants that I think would make excellent gifts for that little some special person in your life, Valentine's Day. If you have somebody maybe that loves plants and loves flowers, but doesn't necessarily want to take on the responsibility of growing them, then I had this beautiful, gorgeous flower arrangement that one of our floral designers also prepared, just as my little advertisement, my little commercial break here. If you are looking to have something, a really special bouquet, we have very talented florists on hand, and we bring cut flowers in, and we have roses. And if you want to reach ahead of us, it's really best if you can pre-order and we can make something customized to what your wishes are. At the same time, if it happens to be, hey, you're running late and you're on your way home and need to just grab something last minute, we'll have something for you there as well. So anyway, we're going to talk about growing plants indoors, focus on beautiful flowers, and keep all of this in mind because it's wintertime. It's a good time to be doing that. And it's also going to Valentine's Day. So we'll celebrate the flowers today. All right. Someone go ahead and kick this thing off with my slideshows. Where am I? It's like every time I do this, it's a new beginning. There we go. So as I said, light becomes the limiting factor when we're growing inside the home. We can provide the other things for plants, but light is also the situation. And just like in your garden, you might be talking about plants that are in direct sun or part shade or full shade kind of thing. When I'm talking about growing plants inside, the first questions you're going to get from me is, hey, describe to me the lighting environment. So we'll try to get a handle on that. And even within your home, you might look around and observe and see different lighting at different times of the day. And this can be a little bit confusing, even how we look at it. So in this corner of the room, you can see there's a sheer curtain in there. If I took that curtain away, if I took that curtain down, that would be an example of what I call just direct sun coming straight through the window, right inside the window frame. That would be direct sun. Now, one of the things that we have to understand is just through reflection and refraction off of the glass surface, we lose about 50% of the sun's intensity the minute we were outside that window versus inside the window. So about half of that sunlight comes through. But again, if you were in that window and we took the curtain down, that would be a direct sun environment. Now, because I have the sheer curtain up there and that's diffusing the light even further, I would still describe this area as very bright light, somewhat even indirect light where we get the reflections off of the wall and everything. So we'll call that bright to bright indirect in there. As we move further from the window, there's literally an exponential reduction in the light intensity. And so that as we get over to this side of the couch, you can see we still have a little bit of bright light, but this is definitely indirect light. What we're doing is we're getting a lot of reflected light that's just kind of bouncing off of the walls. There are skylights, and so there's a little bit of direct sun coming through the skylights. So this is what I'm going to definitely call more of an indirect light. And if I stepped over here to where the cyclone is on the table and you can see there's no sun rays hitting that at all, then that's going to be definitely like an indirect light. So these are just kind of terms that are out there, and there's so many different ways. I even put a little app on my phone that I could measure sunlight, but I think that's a little bit complicated. I liked one that if you put your hand in there, would it cast a shadow? If you can clearly see a pretty well-defined shadow, then we might call that bright light. If you don't see that shadow, then I'm really calling that low light levels. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about. So if we look at this, for example, where you have a palm growing, palm would be suitable for a very bright, almost sunny environment. When you put palms into lower light levels, then they kind of start to deteriorate or go a little bit from there. So we always want to look at and select plants that suit the indoor environment, the indoor lighting in there. So some examples that I have of plants with really bright, colorful leaves. So if you take, for example, I have the tricolor Dracaena over there. It's got the skinny leaf on it. Dracaena, if you're familiar with these plants, they can go anywhere from like a solid green all the way to sort of this, what called it, has the 3 different colors on there. The croton, which again, the intense variegation you see on that leaf. This plant these plants in their native environment would be growing in a full sun tropical environment. And the bright intensity of that sunlight really brings out the intensity of the variegation in the color that exists in those leaves. As that plant moves into lower light levels, the intensity of that coloration and variegation decreases. So again, the plants, they acclimate to the environment they're in. But if you want to get this kind of coloration, you need to have this in very bright or even direct sunlight. And this is pretty, not always, there's always exceptions, like we know, but when you see that intense variegation in plant, just know we're probably talking about a brighter, higher light condition. And a lot of us just don't have this in our home. Um, Other examples of plants that are going to need brighter, more intense sunlight in there would be things like cactus and succulent that we know about, the bromeliads, even a lot of our orchids. But even within that orchid family, and we'll talk about some of this in more detail, some of them will tolerate a little bit lower light levels. But I think a part of my point here is also for a plant to blossom, for it to flower, it typically requires more energy to produce that bloom. And if it's in a low light environment, your plant might live, but then your flowering gets diminished. So again, looking at these lighting conditions becomes critical. One other little thing I've mentioned at this point, though, is if we're not fortunate enough, if we don't have the ideal lighting conditions, but I want to grow this plant, then a lot of times we can talk about supplementing or adding some artificial light if that's where you want to go with it. Let's tend to say, hey, okay, maybe I just don't have the ideal growing conditions that are there, and I'm trying to, again, select plants that are suitable for my home. There's many tropical plants that do quite well, even just indirect light. So a couple of these like pothos or that cast iron plant. I even have that ficus, the rubber tree in there. Now this one, because of the variegation in the leaf, if I get a little brighter light in there, that will hold that variegation better. But these plants, they don't need any kind of direct sun hitting them. These are sometimes really nice for if you're in office space and maybe all I have is artificial lighting, or maybe I just have a little indirect light that's there. So you might find these growing if you go to the dentist or the doctor's office, or the barbershop. Many places, a lot of them think these places where people like to have plants, but they don't necessarily have the ideal environment. So these would be examples, some nice foliage plants that we continue to grow, even if we have a little bit lower kind of light environment. So I think this, yeah, before I go to water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little pause here. I'm going to show you a couple other plants that we can use for different environments, but this is also a time where we'll be able to take questions if you have anything about the plant selection, lighting, and so on. And then from here, I'll continue to talk about watering and pest management and that type of thing. So where will I begin? I'm going to begin with a couple special guests. These two plants, this one, which is called I have to look at the name on there. This is Monstera, or it's actually a philodendron that's called Caramel Marble. This is just a little starter plant, little rooted cutting that's in here. But one of the things that happens is it's a part of a collector's condition. So a lot of people that are very, very much excited about and like collecting all the latest, newest varieties, the greenhouse manager asked if I could bring these two plants in, show them off, because I think he's so proud and excited to have them. They arrived in our greenhouse here at the Fair Oaks location about 2 hours ago. So this is like just fresh, hot off the truck, new delivery. This one is called the White Monster, a Monstera White Monster. So what's happened in the plant world with tropical plants, variegation, I'm going to say, is a really, really big thing. And so these plants, when I look at it, I'm saying, wow, what's all the excitement about? But then I looked onto it. Apparently this one, the White Monster, Yep, make sure I got my names right. White monster. It's the variegation in here. It's like as this plant matures, it becomes more pronounced, and we move less from kind of the marbled color, less from the creamy color, and we get some really strong white colorations in there. This is the plant that also the leaves grow quite large in there, and they will get the festration where they start to open, or like what you would think of a split leaf philodendron, and these leaves start to divide. So as this plant grows and matures, it's really the variegation, the leaf shape, and it's a new introduction because of the improvements in that variegation that makes it a real collector's kind of plant. These are apparently very hard to find, but we just got them here at the Fair Oaks store. This one again, which again, I'd never heard of these plants till 2 hours ago, but it's exciting to learn about it all. So I started looking at this one, which they call the caramel marble online. This one actually kind of starts to get me excited because this coloration, kind of this orange variegation that's in this, or this kind of almost caramel color, that just continues as the plant grows. It gets more and more pronounced. The leaves, as they start to take on their mature stage, because this is their juvenile condition, but this leaf starts to expand out. It starts to get this very deep, very kind of serrated margin along there. And so both of these plants will continue to grow and develop. We're just looking at them at their juvenile state. So that's like a couple special things that we have that just came in today. So if you have a Valentine that is a real collector, that would be certainly a good plant to have. Let's say, I was helping a customer just this morning, about an hour ago. She decided she wanted to get her husband an orchid, and was looking for a little couple recommendations on that and potting it up. And immediately I go to her and say, "Wow, has your husband had any experience growing orchids or plants at all?" She says, "No, not at all. But she does really pretty and make a nice gift." I said, "Well, fantastic, excellent place to start." I said, "I grow orchids because they're so easy. This really is one of the easiest plants, flowering plants you can have inside your home." And just as I explained to her, I was telling her, I said, "What happens? This plant, they grow, it's an epiphyte. It doesn't grow in the soil. It would be growing in rock crevices, tree branches, in a tropical rainforest, and the roots on this are built differently. So in that environment, when it rains, that water would permeate right through the vellum, the outer layer of that root cover, directly in the root, and the plant absorbs it, just straight out of the air, the rainfall that comes in there. So their watering requirements are going to be quite different. I said every single time, like 9 out of 10 times, somebody comes into the garden center, if you're having problems with an orchid, is this it's being kept too wet. That these plants, I was trying to explain, they are the easiest thing to grow, but the way to do that, my little key success is, I said, when you water this, I don't want you to be stingy. I want you to water it. I mean, soak it, take it over the kitchen sink, soak it, saturate it, let water until it's just absolutely soaking wet. Let all that excess water drain out, and then go and put it back into the flower pot. So the thing is, now we're going to leave it alone. After this, I don't water it again until we get to the point where this moss that's in here actually begins to feel dry to the touch. So a lot of times I say, I don't want you to be stingy about watering. I want you to be generous when you water, but then leave it alone. So if you were to do this, if you were to go out and soak it every day, then probably within a week, 10 days, it's a dead plant. So with that, don't let orchids intimidate you. And this particular one, this Phalaenopsis orchid that has the big fat leaves down here and then forms the flower spikes, this is going to be the easiest one for indoor growing because it will tolerate kind of a moderate or indirect light. Some of these others, and if you are having fun growing orchids, you can continue to grow from there, like this Dendrobium. They become a little trickier, like you had seen the Cattleya in the picture earlier. The biggest thing is they need brighter light conditions, much higher light conditions. They have a different kind of watering regime or a different bark media, different growing media that's in there. But again, if you have good lighting, that can be surprisingly very impressive but easy plant to offer your Valentine. I'm just going to show maybe two others and then see if we have any questions, comments. African violets. Uh, Deal with African violets as they've been extensively hybridized. So many different colors that are out there. This is one of the few plants that we can grow inside our homes that just can grow with indirect light, so they perform well indoors, but this can continuously flower. So sometimes like these orchids, they may only bloom for you once a year, maybe if you're lucky, have ideal conditions twice a year, but those flowers will last for several months. So it's still, they're fantastic. But African violets, they are one that you can grow and they will flower continuously. This particular one is in what's called an orchid pot, a African violet pot, because we try to keep the water off of the leaves and water from the bottom. It's all packaging. I'm not going to unpack it. But this is inside a pot that has a permeable pot in there. So we fill this with water, and then that water is sorbed up through the bottom of that. But these will do well under inflorescent lights. So they do well with indoor lighting, relatively easy to grow. And I've got a bunch of other stuff, but at this point, let me see if I have any sort of questions. And after this, then we'll go into some more of the cultural qualities of indoor gardening.
Oh yeah, we have a few questions on African violets and orchids actually. So if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to send them my way. We'll start out with African violets. Okay, so this question is, we have a few small African violets that I recently transplanted that have yellow leaves. My wife says she uses a liquid African violet feed whenever she waters the plants, and she waters them when the soil is dry. Do you have any recommendations?
So the watering and the fertilization sounds pretty good. We'll talk a little bit more about fertilizer, or maybe we go ahead and talk about now. I've tried a lot of different fertilizers, and I think that it doesn't make a whole lot of difference as long as the plant gets fertilized. So you basically have two different strategies. What your wife is doing is she's probably using a water soluble fertilizer, something, again, this Schultz comes a little eyedropper, and you can put a few drops in the watering each time and do this each time you water. So we call spoon feeding, where each time I water, I'm just giving it a little bit of a low application of nutrients. And that's perfectly good. That's actually how I take care of the few plants I have. Another approach would be, this is a time release fertilizer. The fertilizer is encapsulated. It's in a little resin coating. And as you water, that fertilizer diffuses through that resin coating. So it's kind of a convenience, where this one I only have to apply it about, I think it's once every 9 months, or no, every 6 months on this. So this is a 6-month formulation. So I do it once or twice a year. Whereas this, I just get in the habit of putting the water each time. African violets should be allowed to go slightly dry between watering. So I think you're doing right on those things. Yellowing, it could just be if it's some of the older leaves. Leaves age out. They grow a leaf, and eventually that leaf starts to reach maturity, starts to get old. And so it's just that oldest, most outermost layer of leaves down there, then that might just be old leaves that get trimmed off of there. If it's more extensive than that, then I'm going to ask you to bring pictures, or the plant, bring it in the plant clinic. Let's look at it. Because then it could be a watering thing. And when I say watering, possibly that's staying a little bit too wet, not draining well enough. But sounds like your wife's kind of on top of this. And so I feel better looking at the plant. I'm going to assume she's doing pretty well. And these might just be some old leaves that need to be trimmed off.
Okay, we have a few questions on orchids, so I am going to start by telling everyone, because I think it's enough. It could take a whole class. We do have a class on the books for orchids. I just haven't put it on the website yet. We just got it booked late last week. It will be in March. I think March 21st, but I need to check that. So we do a whole class on orchids. So with that, David, I'll tell you what the questions are. Please explain how to take care of orchids, when and how to prune them, repotting, and when to fertilize. The other question we have on orchids is, I was told that in order to encourage blooming on orchids, it's good to give them a chill outdoors before bringing them into the house. No frost, but maybe temps in the 40s. Does this really help the plant to bloom?
Good. So with that introduction, I wholeheartedly encourage you to go to the orchids class because this is a whole topic by itself. I had to put them in today because they're also really awesome for Valentine's. That's sort of my connection that goes on there. Uh, I want to say I'm going to start with the situation of reblooming them because you buy a flower like this, and I'm going to talk basically just about the Phalaenopsis orchids because these are the easiest, most common ones. Of this is nice because what will happen, this bud opens and this bud opens, this bud, and so it works its way down the stem, and then this flower fades, this flower fades, this flower fades, so that the entire bloom cycle can go on for several weeks or a few months. But at the end of the bloom cycle, uh, there are a couple things that you can do. Sometimes I'll prune it back to what I call this eye. You might be able to see even a little bit. There's a little bud right here. And if we prune it back, sometimes that will produce a second spike. It's going to be smaller and not as showy. So sometimes if we don't want to do that, we just go down and remove the entire flower spike and go down here. So now I have basically an ugly little plant with leaves, no flowers. And it's best at that point to go through a resting phase where we might back off just a little bit on the fertilizer. Don't look for any new growths or new shoots or something. It will go through a short rest, and then you'll start to see a new leaf begin to emerge. At that point, I'll kind of resume fertilizing, which again, I don't care what fertilizer you use, whether it's an orchid fertilizer or an all-purpose. I think that's secondary. Uh, I'm a big believer. I like because they love the humidity. So in my house, it's so dry lately. I miss the plants frequently, just kind of increase the humidity. Make sure absolutely they dry out between watering times. I've talked about that. And then you're correct. It's that chilling period that initiates the flowering. So to initiate flowering, the orchid, what it really likes is about 10 or 15 degrees temperature difference between temperature shift between day and night. So if you were in the mountains of South America where they might be naturally growing in higher elevations, it might go down to, let's say, 40, 50 degrees at night and then warm up again to 70, 80 a day. And it's when you have that kind of temperature differential that really initiates flowering. So again, just my own personal life, and I got one of those programmable thermostats. And when I'm leaving the home, like if you went to my house right now, it's 62 degrees, right? So I keep the house like ridiculously cold for most people because I'm not home very much. And so I'm able to get them to rebloom pretty frequently because I get that temperature shift. And then then it warms up when I get back home. You can do this by taking your plants outside during the growing season during summer or fall. But yes, getting that temperature difference or putting it in a cold room really is kind of critical to getting them to rebloom. As far as like repotting, the different media, all that stuff, I think we're going to have to leave that for the orchid class because otherwise, you're right, that will take up the entire rest of our program today.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's going to be March 21st, but it'll be up on the website soon. I just haven't had a chance to actually put it up yet.
And it's all
Next
easy.
question.
It's all easy. It's just like
Oh, yeah.
just going through how to do it. I don't want to
Yeah,
sound.
he'll be covering all of it. Anything, it's for beginners. It's great. All right, next question. Do tropical plants have a different kind of life cycle than annuals, biennials, and perennials?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely. I think we talked about a little bit this a couple weeks ago in our little botany class. The tropical plants, all the ones that I'm talking about here, and I'm going to say 90%, if not more than that, that you find in our greenhouse are perennial plants. So in their home environment, in a tropical environment, they would just grow, 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 grow. And actually, I've got a picture to show you at the end of this what happens. So what we're doing a lot of times is just growing tropical plants inside and just not allowing them to reach maturity. If they start getting too big, we prune them or we propagate them. or they don't survive kind of thing. But yeah, in their natural environment, they would just continue growing. There are a few little annuals or biennials, but that would just be like a seasonal color kind of thing. And we do very little of that. So yeah, think of them as perennials. And if they were in their natural environment, they would just be sort of in a constant growing period. Some of them might go through a dormancy, but would be more of a wet, dry kind of cycle. So there are some plants that we can initiate a little rest or dormancy by wet, dry watering cycle.
Yeah,
But
that
this
reminds me
is,
when I sent you a picture of a begonia I was growing. You probably don't remember this, but it was almost touching the ceiling. I was like, what is going on with this? It was so huge.
but yeah, let's
Okay.
let's take one or two more questions, and then I'm going to
Yeah,
quickly. I promise we'll be quick. Talk a little bit about the watering stuff, and then we go back to some questions.
definitely. What would be a more traditional or original African violet color?
Sort of the traditional one I think of is violet. Just just like you would see a violet growing out, a wild violet growing in your garden. But this again, they can be easily hybridized. I mean, the hobbyists will do this at home, where you can do the fertilization between plants yourself, and then grow them from seed and develop new varieties. And we have a huge selection. We have leaf variegation, single flower, double flower. Some have variegation of flower color, and you can go anywhere from white to yellow to pink to right. But the traditional one is just that violet color, single flowers, and you probably see the stuff. I really like the simplicity of it. I'm personally, you don't see me a lot of double flowered, heavily petaled, or variegated plants. It's just not my thing. It's not a judgment. But but they're all easy to grow though. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You want to take one more question?
Oh, yeah, one more question, then we'll go
Okay.
back to the
How
slides.
can you tell when your plants need high humidity and regular misting? Do you have any tips on how to provide humidity in a dry apartment? It's a good
Yeah,
question.
so all of these plants are going to do better in 50% or more humidity, even 50% is lower. If you go to like the National Botanic Gardens, you'll see they have mist systems going off, and it might be every 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and you just go in there, you feel the humidity. A lot of our homes, like right now in the winter, and it's been so dry, unless you actually have a house humidifier or something, your indoor humidity could easily be down below 20%. So you're talking about a plant that would love to be at least 50% and would be much happier if we were like 80, 90% humidity, though that's not likely. And they're down there 10 or 20. So there's different ways to do this. These saucers, one of the simplest, easiest ways, this is sitting in a saucer, um, would be in this saucer. If I filled this up with pebbles and I was to sit this on top of that pebble tray, now what I'm doing is I'm getting humidity evaporating out of this tray around there, increasing the relative humidity in this immediate area. I don't want this sitting in water. That's the reason for elevating it on a layer of pebbles. So pebble trays work grouping plants together so that they are, as their transpiration, again, because I know you were in class last time, we did, so the transpiration of plants, so they kind of humidify each other. I keep a mister right there at a little table where I'm growing my plants. And whenever I feel like I wake up, it's pretty much every morning, I just kind of with a hand mister, mist in the air. I think it makes a difference, but the reality of it is when I put that mist out there, it's dried, gone within minutes. So I have increased the humidity, but it's very short time. So throughout the day or the weekend, or if I happen to be home, just if I'm going by and I'm looking at because I go at work as they're starting to bloom, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, and I'll just put some mist on there. I just not directing plants, but just try and create this mist in the air. And I've got it's a stone table, so I'm not worried about a little bit of mist floating on there. But yeah, so just you can't really overdo it. Of just I keep that Mr. Handy, and whenever I feel like I just want to show a little love, we do it. Our greenhouses, a lot of times you'll see we can just run water all over the floor because we have floor drains, and that helps to boost the humidity. So there's just different ways to do it, but that's not really the greenhouse way. Is not really practical for homeowners. Let's do this. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. I forgot. I'm starting to fade out there. Let me show you just a couple more pictures real quick here. Because I've mentioned this before. So this is spathiphyllum, peace lily that came in looking like that. Uh, Another sad stories here. When you come as a customer, I know it's not like good to tell customer stories, but I mean we learn from all each other and stuff. And these are all from years ago, so I'm not trying to I understand I make all kinds of mistakes in my life too. But this plant belonged to his deceased father. So this plant had a lot of emotional, sentimental value for it, brought into the clinic. And I look at this, and the first thing I said is, well, let's take this outside because I know this is going to be messy. But one of the things that happens is you see these brown edges all around here, brown edges showing up, brown leaves in there, the discoloration and everything. When you look at this plant, these are all the symptoms of a plant that's too dry, right? But one of the things I know, and we've talked about this many times, you can't tell by looking at the plant. We have to actually check and see what's going on below in the root ball in here. And I kind of knew what was going on here, but when I got it outside and I opened this up, see all this water that's down here? All this water came spilling out of that pot, and you see it's just pitch black. So this plant has been sitting in a container that's full of water and has no drainage in there. And it's the roots, they need water, but they absolutely have to have air to breathe. So this is why I hate this word overwatering, and I try to always explain it. If we say the word overwatering, what that means is usually that we are watering too frequently. It doesn't mean that we want to be stingy. I'm not trying to put a quarter cup of water in there. When I water, I want to be thorough so that I water the entire soil profile that goes through there. But it has to have a way to exit, a way to drain out. If it doesn't, it fills up with water, becomes saturated. The plant doesn't have any oxygen to breathe, and that's what we talk about when we say overwatering. Now, as this was a happy story, this is the same plant. I was like, oh, I don't know. Let's see what we can do. I took this, handed off to one of our really talented people that were working in the greenhouse, and they have this idea. They took that plant, trimmed off the dead leaves, trimmed off the dead roots, got it in some fresh potting mix, and then this ceramic piece also was a family heirloom, and so they were able to plant that back into here. And so again, we still had the wonderful memories that went with it. And I'm sure this plant, just a little TLC and care recovered, gave it good attention. So this drainage is so critical when growing in pots and flower and containers. This is why we have specially designed potting mix. This is not soil like we're growing out in the garden. This is the Merrifield potting mix that you're looking at right here. We formulated this. We tried a lot of different things, different recipes, so to speak. And this is what we landed on. It's kind of an all-purpose mix. Our goal is that we want a media that can retain moisture. We don't want it to dry out instantly. So things like the peat moss is really good at that, having a good balance of moisture retention in there. There's just some natural organic compost in there. Aged bark, you see coir is coconut fiber. It's a byproduct from processing coconuts that also has the density to hold moisture. The wood fiber, that's actually it's like it's pine trees that have been heat expanded and is just using a fibrous material in there. So these products, these ingredients, they're basically there to act like a sponge and hold water and nutrients for the plant and provide a good rooting media for them. We also then start adding in vermiculite, perlite, which are like these little white, look like pebbles. This is to open it up so we have good drainage and porosity. So we've aimed to get this all-purpose mix that holds enough moisture if I'm growing plants outside, or so I don't have to constantly water. It works for most plants, but then it's also well enough drained that it will that will allow it to drain out, so we have poor space for oxygen that's in there. Now there are specialty plants, like you said, orchids have special
Fungus gnats are a common and bothersome issue with indoor plant care, especially in the winter. For the most effective solution, our plant clinic recommends high-yield systemic insect granules or mosquito bits as an organic treatment. Both methods effectively target and eliminate larvae in the soil over a period of time. So to expedite this process, complement either treatment with yellow sticky traps. This additional step tackles the adult gnats, preventing them from laying eggs while the primary treatment works its magic on the larvae in the soil. Say goodbye to fungus gnats.
Okay, so the reason I put that little video in there, and I hope you can hear that, and this does pertain to the soil, to the watering, to our plant care. Switching real quickly, some pest issues on there. Probably the most common and one of the most annoying issues you can have when you do bring plants into the home is sometimes those little fungus gnats will develop down in the soil. They don't bite, they don't sting, they really do no harm to people or pets, and they are essentially do very, very, very little or almost insignificant damage to the plants. What they're doing is the larvae are down in the soil. They feed on the decaying organic matter, the compost and the products that are in the soil, or if your plant is staying too wet, sometimes the decaying roots that are in there from the plant. So what will happen in this environment when I've got organic compost, if I have decaying roots, if it's staying moist and it's inside the warmth of the home, this is an ideal environment for these gnats to develop. And then they start to emerge out of there. They fly around just buzzing. They're attracted to light. So the next thing you're sitting down, at dinner time, eating your salad, and you suddenly these little gnats are buzzing around and annoying the heck out of you. So those are fungus gnats, and it can happen to anybody in common problems. So our strategies, number one, is let's try to change that environment. Again, all those stuff I was talking about, the soil staying too moist that's in there. Maybe it's a small plant and you can just repot it. Take steps like that to improve the environment that's there. If that's not getting you the results or that's not practical for you, another thing we can do are those sticky traps, these sticky yellow traps I was talking about. But what this is doing is they're just capturing the gnats that are flying around. The larvae are still there, the eggs are still there, but I can break that cycle and I can reduce that by just putting these sticky glue traps. There's no pesticides at all. We're talking about all natural, just environmental cultural practices. If the problem is more widespread or you're more highly annoyed, we want to take the next step up. These systemic granules, this is a chemical insecticide that we put in the soil, in the pot, and then as that gets down into the roots, it gradually starts killing the larvae. So it's not an instant thing, but eggs hatch, this kills the larvae, prevents the adults from coming out, stops the egg laying. And if we're on this and we stay this, it's something we do, I think, every 6 weeks, we can get rid of that problem. So that's another little thing that can go with plants. And I'm hurrying through this because I want to have time for some questions. But a couple other pests that we can encounter, because again, just like we're gardening outside, we can have some of the same challenges. Those are our fungus gnats. You can see they're tiny, just look like a gnat that you would find outside. Our scale insects. So this one we call mealybug, a close relative of the soft brown scale. They don't look like insects, but they are. This is like where my pointer is. That's a little tiny baby, immature one. Their mouth is going into that leaf like a little syringe. They're sucking sap out of the plant to sustain themselves. As they're sucking the sap out of the plant, they'll create this sticky residue, and you walk around, you feel your feet sticking to the floor or on the tabletop, and eventually you start seeing this black mold that's growing on that we call the honeydew that the insects are secreting that's out there. This is also harming the plants as it starts to take all the nutrients from the plant. So you'll see these people often come in, they say, oh, what's this disease? This is a close-up. You can clearly see that's the little individual body on there, and it's a piercing, sucking insect. Again, there are different ways to control that. Spider mites, this is again magnified. This is the mite, this is their little egg. When you get an extremely high population, you kind of start to see this webbing that's going on. Now with scale and with fungus gnats, this systemic insect treatment here can help with that. But this product does not control mites. So if we have mites on there, sometimes at this point, I will direct you either towards like an insecticidal soap can help on this, or another option is a horticultural oil. But the oil, because we don't want to use this indoors, it can stain the flooring and the carpeting. It's a natural product, but this is something we would need to do in the garage, the basement, outside on a nice day that's there. So you can occasionally run into these things. They're generalists. They go after all different plants, but this is where we can help you sort of clinic. Now I've got one more picture and then we'll go back to our questions. So this happened to be, I was on a trip, this probably, I can't remember, a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. But Mounts Botanical Garden, apparently Mounts was the first extension agent in Palm Beach County, in the huge agricultural area that's there. And so he kind of started, and they continued a botanical garden in his honor. But these, earlier we were talking about, are plants, perennials, annuals, biennials. They're perennials. So this is, for example, this is a ponytail palm in the background, the biggest one I've ever seen. All I ever see up here are small ones that are pots on your tabletop. And if it's in a pot in a low light environment, you know, and not living to its full capacity, it's a wonderful, sturdy little houseplant. I had no idea when it's out in its natural environment that's capable of growing into like a 25, 30 foot tall tree. So I love that when somebody called that question, because I thought, yeah, this is what we're growing. These are the plants that are growing in our home. It's just in our home in the lower light conditions and everything, we're just never going to reach this kind of results that goes on. All right, so I'm taking a quick breather here while I toss it back to Sally, see if you have questions or comments.
All right, we've got a few more questions. If you have questions, please feel free to submit them. We'll get to as many as we can in the next 8 to 10 minutes. Our first question, David, is about watering. I'm sorry if I missed this. If there are pebbles on the bottom of the pot, does that make it unnecessary to have the water drained at the bottom? So if you have like where you put the pebbles at the bottom.
So there's again, like with gardening, there's like no absolute right and wrong on this. I do not under any circumstances like to put plants in a pot that doesn't have drainage. So this pot that you can see has a drain hole going here, peeking at you through there. This is so excess water can escape through here, so it doesn't fill up like a tub. Because otherwise, if my plant's sitting here in a little bucket and it fills up with water, there's no place for that water to go, stays saturated, the roots don't get the oxygen, and then we start running into dead plants that's there. Sometimes people, they have a pot that doesn't have a drainage hole, or there was actually a common practice where people would recommend putting a layer of stone down here. And the idea is that if I put a layer of stone down here, that would provide sufficient drainage or enhance the drainage to the point where I didn't have to worry about having a pot with a hole. So that is something that's out there. It's done, and people are successful with it. I don't recommend that. I try at all possible costs to not do that, because here's what we know. That pore space that's in the gravel, a couple things can go wrong. One is eventually that gets clogged up, that gets filled, right? Little soil particles get in there, and those voids and stuff that was in there, that gets filled. So some people might even put some landscape fabric or try to work around that kind of deal. The other is, and this has been shown over and over in different experiments, if water is moving through a soil profile, if I'm putting water and it's moving, I want to pour it in and have it come out the bottom. if I have layers, every time I have a different layer of texture, that water doesn't move uniformly. So if I have a layer of pebbles down here, it does not enhance drainage. What happens is that water trickles down, it hits that layer of pebbles, and then that water actually starts to build up in the soil. And I end up where the upper layer of the soil can be moist and it can be dry down below until it actually starts to reach a point where just the sheer weight, the gravitational pull then can bring it through here. So what all this stuff in the end of the day means is if I'm putting layers in there, putting a gravel layer in there, uh, I'm getting what we call a perched water table. I'm not getting uniform water movement through there. Those pebbles can fail. It's something that I really don't like to recommend. That would be like a sort of a last ditch effort that I would do that. And people are successful doing it. So just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, is maybe the way I would put that. But if it's working for you, it's working for you.
All right. Next question. I know that Clivia likes to be root bound, right? How do I know if and when to divide my plant?
So climbing can be a tricky plant to grow for sure. A lot of our flowering plants prefer to be root bound. Look at this orchid. You look at that orchid and you look at those pop and those roots. One of the things that we find is a lot of plants, if they're what we call root bound, that tends to induce better flowering. If I would sometimes call overpot, put it into a larger pot, sometimes that plant will grow as the roots go to expand that soil, but then it may be a while before it kind of delays flowering on the plant. So if we're repotting, for example, we typically just go up one size at a time in there. So Clivia, I don't know the exact details on that because I know it kind of goes this whole cycle. I think if I remember correctly, it is sort of like cool temperatures. It goes through a little bit of like a cool dry spell to kind of simulate a dormancy, and then we resume watering and warmth, try to induce flowering on it. So the repotting would be, I'm guessing at this little bit, I think it's going to happen like after flowering. And I do prefer to keep that just a little bit pot bound. Now, some people, it's just general practice, like maybe every 3 or 4 years to repot. So if it's been in a pot for many years, which they're capable of doing, you may repot it because the soil is degraded, just needs to be refreshed.
Okay. All right. Next question. This is a little jump of topic. So we may, I don't know if you're gonna have time to address the whole thing, but this is about lettuce starts being grown indoors. I have grow lights. She transplanted her lettuce seedlings into larger pots. The second set of true leaves is curling. The first set and the baby leaves didn't curl. She's a fan moving the air. She fertilizes and waters them sparingly. Do you know what would the problem be? Or do you think you need to see some photos?
I'd like to see some photos. I'm also, first thing I'm kind of think of is the lighting, because I understand you have some supplemental lighting, but sort of want to know what type. I prefer LED if we have those, and also close enough light intensity is there. If you don't have sufficient light intensity, that can lead to some leaf curling on there. That was sort of just one, the first thing comes to mind. The other, which I'm going to say, and this is very unlikely, but I'd have to see ruled out, is aphids are a pretty common pest. And you're like, but how can I do this? They're seedlings and I just started. So that's what I'm saying, it's unlikely. But aphids, which is a tiny, tiny little insect, and you look on the underside of the new leaves, but it's a piercing, sucking kind of plant, and that can also lead to leaf curling.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
send us some pictures. We'll get a little closer look on that. But I'm thinking I'd want to know more about the lighting and do an inspection, see if any chance that this could be a pest issue.
Okay. Next question. I have a variety of pothos, some solid, some are variegated. I've noticed two of the solid leaf plants are developing some leaves with slight variegation. Why might this be? Can I take steps to prevent this?
Um, So variegation, and a lot of times, and it just happens in these plants, it's a mutation that naturally occurs in the plant. And if you like that mutation, then we try to propagate it. If you're saying, oh, is there something I could do to stop that? Uh, Probably not. The only choice you would have would be to remove, cut that part of the plant off that's expressing the variegation in hopes that it doesn't happen. I'm thinking your plant probably has variegation somewhere in its genetic history, and it's just going to happen. It's going to come out and express itself. You cut it off, but at some point again, it may come back and express itself again. And no, there's really nothing you could do other than just to remove that, if you dislike it.
Okay. All right. We have 3 questions left, and I think all of them should be fairly quick. So if you're good, we'll go ahead and go through those three.
I'm good. Yeah.
All right. I know the 1/3 depths of soil test to determine if it is time to water plants, but is there a general time period you should water plants like once a week?
I can never give you just a general thing on that. That a lot of this just depends so much like on the size of the pot and the size container. If you have a larger container, that tends to hold more water. So that may be watered much less frequently, the type of plant and everything. Uh, it's just really hard to give you a generalization. If this was in a very broad general terms, if I'm looking at, say, just little philodendron in a 4-inch pot like this, hey, watering once like every 5 to 7 days is probably right on there. So for a lot of our smaller house plants, that's probably true. If I have large plants that might be in a 3-gallon, 5-gallon, 10-gallon size pot, some of those it might be once a month because of the size and volume of the container that's in there. So each plant is individual. I can tell just by feeling the weight. I don't go poking my fingers in there a lot. If you've done this for a while, you just get to eventually where you can feel the weight of the plant. I mean, like this plant now, if you could feel it, you would know it's very well watered, and it's probably good for like at least another 4 or 5 days in most homes. But yeah, I might sign in a little bit. I'll give because I'm trying to be not too rigid. If I'm talking about plants and like that size pot, this size pot, we might go once a week, but that's a very, very broad thing, and I'd rather you check on the plants. Check on it, please.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. Um, is there any brand of systemic insecticide that you recommend?
There's so the one that I'm showing, and I mentioned this. So the one that I'm showing in the video is Fertilome. It was in a big yellow can. They've changed it. Their can, same product, but they put it in this white bottle. It's called Fertilome systemic insecticide granules. Tell you the truth, they're pretty much all the same. There's an active ingredient in there called imidacloprid that is essentially what is being used in all the products. The patent is expired, so it doesn't matter if it's made by Ortho or BioAdvanced or Fertilome. It's probably all the same stuff, just different packaging. This is nice. I mean, hey, this is like kind of a generic company. They work with independent garden centers. It's a co-op, so it allows us to give more competitive pricing on it. But it's really just look at the size and the price, because other than that, they probably all have the same ingredients.
Okay. All right. Last question. I have recently noticed brown spots with yellow circles on a few of my pothos leaves. Is there a common problem that this could be representing?
Yeah, with tropical plants, a lot of times I see a bacterial leaf spot, which is kind of what my first guess is because of that yellow halo that you're talking about. Uh, I really don't. If you're trying to treat it with fungicides, that's really just that's an absolute last resort because we would be using a copper fungicide. You can't use copper indoors, and it's usually just doesn't make sense to try to do this. The time, the money, the efforts in there. So if it's just a few spots and a few leaves, just cut those leaves off, throw it away, try to maintain sanitation. It spreads sometimes with water, so sometimes managing water, keeping a little bit on the dry side can help. But most of the time, I'll just take the bad leaves, cut them off, and throw them out.
If it's persistent, then see us at the plant clinic. We can offer you or talk to you about this copper spray, but don't go down that road unless you really have to, because it's not an easy or convenient thing to do.
Okay. All right. Well, that's our last question, David.
Okay,
Just a
fantastic.
reminder. So, pardon?
Oh, I was probably talking over you. What?
No, you're good. I was just going to say that's our last question. So, just a reminder for everybody, this recording will be available on YouTube if you want to revisit it. It'll be available probably tomorrow in the afternoon. So, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions. And David, I'll let you close out if you have anything you want to end with.
Hey, keep tuning in. I think in a couple of weeks I'm going to come back and talk to you about pruning, because that's something we have, and hopefully the weather will be on our side. We can go out and do some pruning. But it sounds like you have a great lineup of classes too, like the one on the orchids. So just go to the website, see what's being offered, and say hi when you come by the store.
Yeah, check it out. We've got some good ones. I have Peg teaching a class on growing peonies later this year, which is a new one. I'm excited about that. So we got a little bit of everything in there. All right, everybody, have a great afternoon. David, as always, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I'll see everybody later.